we're entering this new era where video game film adaptations and shows aren't immediately written off. In the past few years alone, we got some pretty decent movies that were based on video games. The Sonic the Hedgehog movie, Detective Pikachu, the Witcher series on Netflix, the Castlevania series, the animated series on Netflix, all pretty okay. Granted, The Witcher was based on books before the video games. It was popularized by the video games, but hey. And as of now, apparently Netflix has about 10 projects in the pipeline that are based on video games. So now that we're getting some quality adaptations actually coming out, fans of certain franchises are starting to wonder, hey, what about my favorite game? And one of those examples is one of the biggest video game franchises out there, The Legend of Zelda. Now, it wasn't that long ago that there was actually a rumor going around that Nintendo actually had a Zelda Netflix series in the works, but apparently somebody leaked it, and then Nintendo went and shut it down because it got leaked. I don't know how true that is. I'm sure there's more to the story than that, but so if a Zelda series were to happen, let's say a Netflix show, how would it happen? What would be the best way to go about it? It's one of my favorite franchises, and I would love to see a show adaptation of it, but I would want it to be done the right way, like any fan would. So I've been thinking about this the past few days, and I have some thoughts. The first thing you have to think about is your main character of the games, Link, is a silent protagonist. He has no voice. He has very little character and personality. Link is meant to be the link between you, the player, and the character in the game. He's designed to be this kind of blank canvas for players to project themselves onto, to imagine that it's them out there adventuring in Hyrule. So this is why I don't think he should be the protagonist of the show. If he does pop up in the show, have his appearances be special, like tease them a bit here and there. So there's no character there for writers to explore unless they wanted to write one for him, but that would also kind of defeat its purpose. I like to compare the story of Zelda games kind of to Star Wars. My favorite stories in Star Wars don't come from the mainline movies. It's the TV shows, the books, the material that explores the lesser known characters and these smaller side stories. It's often those that tell the most interesting and relatable stories. The same goes for Zelda. Often the main story of any given Zelda game isn't the most compelling or deep. It's the characters and the stories that are more tucked away into the corners of the world where my favorite moments come from. So if a show does happen, I don't think they should retell one of the stories from one of the games. I don't think it would make for a very good show. I think they should write their own original story and take inspiration from some of these moments and side characters in the game. Most Zelda games feature several races of people, and these races make for some pretty interesting characters. You have the Gerudo people living in the desert who are comprised primarily of women. Only a male Gerudo is born once every 100 years. You have the mountain-dwelling Gorons who live off of rocks. You have the Zora, who are an aquatic race that are sometimes friends, sometimes enemies. The recent Breath of the Wild was the first Zelda game to feature fully voice-acted cutscenes. They weren't the deepest by any means, but they brought one character from each of these races together. Seeing a show where you follow one character from each of these diverse peoples and seeing fate thrust them together is rife with potential. One show style that I think I would love for them to try to do is kind of like what Game of Thrones did. Have viewers follow multiple characters and different plot threads all at the same time that aren't necessarily connected to one another, and then maybe later on have them finally meet up and converge. The entire show doesn't need to be like that. That could just be the first season. But that's something other shows have done, where we meet different characters, watch them in their element and get to know them a bit, and then see them meet these other characters that we've also gotten to know, and then watching them interact. And sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen, but that's just a common trope that you see in shows pretty often that I think could work really well for Zelda. On the surface, Zelda games are very kid-like with, fairies and magic, but as any fan would tell you, there are moments where they explore some pretty mature themes. Themes of grief and loss and sacrifice and the gray areas of morality. You could write a whole story arc on how the royal family of Hyrule secretly kept a dungeon where they tortured prisoners. And throughout all of this stuff in the games, Link is just an observer. He's rarely an active participant in these stories, the same way we are as viewers. And that's where you craft your show from. The normal gameplay loop of these games where you explore temples, solve puzzles, fight enemies, wouldn't make for the most compelling show. Sure, you can have that stuff, but save it for the moments in the show where it matters. You know, just like a fight sequence from a Marvel movie. So far, most of these successful video game film and show adaptations have featured a protagonist that has had a, developed personality or a backstory or something like that. But Zelda doesn't have that. In fact, a lot of Japanese RPGs don't. I'm just afraid that the producers of a Zelda show wouldn't greenlight a show where Link isn't featured. Greenlight, because, he's dressed in green. But if they did, then they would have to give him a voice or, write a character for him, and I don't think that would go over well. You're gonna anger some fans no matter what. It's never been Nintendo's MO to go into making a game thinking about story first. They're on record saying several times that they go and develop their games by thinking about the gameplay and player experience first. And once they have that set in stone, then they craft a world and develop characters around it. That's partially why they don't always have the most compelling stories, but they do a really good job of world building. If anything, shows like The Mandalorian showed us that you can have a really successful show that people love without needing, big characters like Han, Luke, or Leia or something like that. Just tell a compelling story in a compelling world and people will watch it. Yeah, so those are just my quick thoughts on what I think a Zelda show would look like. I just wanted this to be a little quick casual thing. I went into this saying I wasn't going to really write a script. I was going to kind of wing it a bit more, but looking at my outline, it actually ended up more like a script, so I hope it didn't look too scripted. But hey, thanks for watching.